Okay, so Arrow Season 2. Now, this is a series that I took a long break from, and by long, I mean a number of years. I got really into it in the first season and tried to watch it fairly religiously, but I got tired of a lot of the soap opera drama, all of the, oh, I like you, oh, now I hate you kind of stuff that tended to take place between Oliver and Laurel and just everyone. And it got so tiresome that it just made me kind of rage quit partway through season one. Now, I'm watching these episodes on library copies of the show, just so we're clear. It's a good show to borrow from the library, actually. I highly recommend it for that. It's not really a series that I would recommend buying myself, but that's because I'm not that big a fan of necessarily having TV shows that are still currently going on DVD. I'm all for having a show that, they aren't still producing, they don't air anymore, that kind of thing on DVD because it's harder to find it. But when it comes to shows that are still being produced, I don't always recommend going out and getting it on DVD because it's like, what's the point? They're still showing it, and in some cases they show it in reruns. Now, part of the problem that I had growing up with a lot of shows like this that were either in syndication or network shows where it had all of the previously on stuff was that in my area, for some reason, the syndicators tended to put things out out of sequence. Let me put it that way. So, let's say you've got some of the syndicated shows like, I don't know, what was that show? And Andromeda with Kevin Sorbo and stuff, where it was supposed to be kind of like Star Trek or Stargate, or kind of like Blake 7, honestly, if you had to make a comparison. And then there was Earth First Contact or something like that. It was kind of an odd series of ideas that Gene Roddenberry had for television series that kind of talked about humanity. Well, the problem for that was that whenever it was on, it always seemed to be out of sequence. It would always have that synopsis of previously on this, and it's like, well, I didn't see that episode, and I can't keep track of all of this. So I can sincerely recommend borrowing this series from the library simply so that you can binge watch it. If you have Netflix, more power to you, because then, hopefully you can binge watch the entire second season. I don't really recommend binge watching the first season, but okay, let me just go into a little bit of the behind the scenes structuring on all of this. So the show itself is interspersed with a lot of flashbacks. So this will be flashbacks that is stuff you never saw, and it's meant to somehow expand on what you're seeing at the present. Okay, except that with the amount of time that it would actually take to show all of this content over the past 5 seasons, you could probably have one season of the show that takes place over 5 years. And those 5 years were the 5 years that Oliver Queen was gone after his ship, the yacht that he and his father and his girlfriend's sister were all aboard, that got caught in a storm and went down. Well, that happened for 5 years, and that's a huge plot device that they just keep bringing up and hammering away. Anyway, it's not a bad plot device, except that they keep coming back to all of these storylines and not just showing you what happened in one episode. If they were to do that at the start of the season, it would save so much time and frustration. Because then you could go, oh yeah, I watched that episode, so I know what happened 5 years ago for this person. But no, they usually do it to somehow bring about some twist or surprise. Now, what's frustrating about this is that they take some liberties with some of the DC lore when it comes to like Slade and some of the other characters. They take a little bit of liberty with their origins for the sake of Arrowverse. And that's a bit of a problem if you're more of a DC fan, where you kind of follow a lot of their origins, you read up on their origins and find out how they were created, and it's not supposed to be the way that they're telling it. They're telling it in a way where, like, I don't know, like originally Slade did not have his origins so closely tied in with the Green Arrow. But because it's the Green Arrow show, they have to make that. Just like originally the Flash didn't have his origins so closely tied in with the Green Arrow, but they decided that for the purposes of the new show The Flash, they were going to do that anyway. Well, I understand why they did it. I just don't appreciate that they did it, because they're going back and revising a lot, and they're making a lot of changes that don't necessarily make the story better. So, kind of getting away from that, some notable plot developments in the series, okay? You have a lot of different characters suddenly coming onto the scene, okay? You've got... you've got this character named Shadow that you're introduced to, who's a temporary love interest for Oliver while he's on the island. You have Laurel constantly coming in and out and back and forth, and at one point she's addicted to booze and pills, and then she's off. And that's kind of where we get into the soap opera drama, because then you have Sarah mysteriously returning from the dead very early in the season as the Black Canary. For those who don't know, Sarah is Laurel's sister. Laurel is a attorney and former girlfriend of Oliver, and while he was gone, yada yada yada. You know, she started dating Tommy, who was Oliver's best friend. This is where we get into the soap opera stuff that drives me absolutely nuts. I get really tired of it really quick, because I don't want to have to keep track of a whole bunch of little social ties and intrigues tied in with all these different characters. For me, the point of the show, and I hate to kind of make this point, but the point of the show is the character of the Green Arrow going on adventures and not all of this social drama. And it's not that I don't have patience for it, it's that it keeps interrupting the storyline. It keeps complicating things just that little bit more, and that's a huge problem for me. You know, I'm trying to keep track of enough, and they seem to think that just by adding another wrench into the works will somehow make me go, oh, how's it going to work out now? It was what got me out of the first season in the first place and made me stop following it, because it was so quickly such a soap opera. And I've watched soap operas, and fair enough, a lot of comic books do revolve around the soap opera formula. You have a little bit of a twist at the end of a comic that makes you want to buy the next one. Okay, cool. But at the same time, a story should kind of be encapsulated in and of itself. You shouldn't necessarily have to recall everything that happened in every episode. Now, getting away from that, there are some standout characters in this show. And it's a little bit sad because they want you to really latch onto Summer Glau as Isabel Rochev because she was on Firefly, and if I remember correctly, I think she was also on another Joss Whedon series. I think she was on Dollhouse, maybe, something like that. You know, she's been in a couple of different things. And she's okay, but I don't really care about her or her character until she becomes a turncoat. Now, you know that she's going to become a turncoat because she pretty much comes in from the beginning and says, I don't like you, Oliver Queen, and I'm going to take over your company. And then suddenly she isn't doing that, and then she's totally back doing that. You know, suddenly she's their friend, and it's like, wait a minute, where did your animosity go? Now, another problem I have with this show is not so much that they keep casting brunettes in a lot of different side roles. It's that they keep casting brunette women who kind of all look alike. There aren't enough distinguishing features between them, and that's really the fault of casting. You know, they just, you know, like you can tell the difference between Laurel Lance and, I don't know, some of the other actresses, some of the other female characters. I am A-okay with that. I'm trying to look through a cast list, but it's like Diggle, who is, you know, Oliver Queen's bodyguard and sidekick for a lot of stuff. Well, he does a pretty good job, but he has a girlfriend or ex-girlfriend from the army, and looking at her versus the Huntress versus a few other characters, it's like, how am I supposed to tell the difference between these women? It's like, yeah, this one's wearing a costume, or yeah, there's like a daughter of Ra's al Ghul, looks almost exactly the same as the other two. So I'm trying to figure all of this out, and I'm having a hell of a time trying to keep it all straight in my head. It would be a little bit easier if they had a different hairstyle, if they had distinguishing features that made it easier for the audience to tell them apart. Like literally at one point at the end, one of them shows, actually both the girlfriend of Diggle and the daughter of Ra's al Ghul show up, and I'm like, wait a minute, what? I can't tell them apart. And I'm usually someone who can distinguish people pretty readily. So this was really weird. And yeah, Summer Glau, I only barely recognize and am able to distinguish from other actresses on the show. Selena Jade has enough of a distinguishing feature to her face, but it's still a little bit challenging. So basically this entire season builds up and is revolving around plots involving Slade. Slade is the villain for this season, and by the end of the season things are resolved and there are some twists and changes in the overarching storyline. But you probably care a little bit more about some of the other aspects of it. For example, who are the characters to watch? Who are the characters that really bring forth a lot of the good developments in the story? Right? Well, I'd like to say it would be great to watch Willa Holland as Thea Queen or Colton Haynes as Roy Harper. But unfortunately, their subplots tend to go nowhere and their acting is just not good. Colton Haynes basically stands there and doesn't make any kind of emotional expression. At some points he's kind of angry, but that's about it. He's not a very enticing character. Willa Holland as Thea Queen, basically the same thing. It's only after Slade kidnaps her at a pivotal point in like the last few episodes that she actually starts to emote, but she starts basically acting like a little girl and sounding like a little girl. I'm not even kidding you on that. She, is just like, I can't believe that you didn't tell me that. So all of these plot threads come together. It turns out that Malcolm Merlyn, who in the last season tried to destroy Starling City with a couple of earthquake creating machines. Yeah, apparently he's Thea's dad. You see my point about the soap opera drama. It gets tiresome really quick. I can kind of deal with it up to a point, but it does get tiresome. I don't want to know that someone is secretly this person's biological parent. Now they have to deal with that, and they have to keep that secret from her. Oh, she found out. Oh no. It gets tiresome. Now that being said, there is actually a really good subplot in a couple of the last episodes of the season where Merlyn, who didn't die at the end of the first season somehow, we thought you were dead. Nope. Anyway, he comes back to try and rescue Thea and take her away somewhere safe. It's like, okay. I actually would have felt better about it if they treated that as one contiguous series of scenes rather than having it as an interspersed series of scenes among all of the other action. It's like, resolve that story before you move on to some other stuff. And it would have worked better. It would have flowed better. I would have felt better about it. There's no reason not to just put that in as your scene 3 of Act 2, which is basically what it was. But part of the problem with this show is that they keep cutting back and forth between all the other storylines, and it makes it harder to keep track of a lot of it. So, who are characters that you actually want to see more of? Characters that you actually want to follow? Well, it's kind of out of left field, but the writers did a better job writing Felicity Smoke than they did in the first season. Felicity has done a lot of cameos on The Flash in the first couple of seasons because they wrote in the Arrow storyline that she had kind of a crush on oh, God. Not Wally. Barry Allen. Yeah, they put in that she had kind of a crush on him because he was smart and sweet and funny and kind. And you can kind of see it. It's enjoyable, but in the actual episode, the pilot episode of The Flash, you don't get that he's gone off to Starling City for a couple of days at this point. When I watched the pilot episode of that, I was like, wait a minute. At what point did he do all of this in the first episode? Supposedly he was there for days, so long that he wasn't going to be able to get there in time for everything. I don't know. It doesn't quite make sense to me. I'm going to have to reassess the storyline of that first episode. Because I think when the accident happens to Barry Allen, it takes place the same day as you're introduced to him. So maybe he got there that day. I don't know. I'm not going to really press myself on that. There's a brief reintroduction of the Huntress from the first season, and the idea is basically that the Huntress is out of control because she does kill. And it's a good comparison for our hero, Oliver Queen, to understand why he shouldn't kill. Because he is using a lethal weapon, but he's... And in the first season, he's using it in a lethal way with a lot of things, which makes him a dangerous vigilante, more of a problem than otherwise. And some people are very critical of it. They're like, well, while you're going in with your Nerf arrows or whatever, they're not going to be doing that. They're going to be trying to kill you. And it's like, well, you got to do what you got to do. And if you're going to kill people, then it's going to be a problem for the law, because then you're causing more problems. So, in an interesting development at the start of the first season, after all of the headache over the earthquake and the fact that Tommy dies in the earthquake trying to get Laurel out, yeah, you end up with Oliver kind of going through a crisis of conscience, which is pretty cool. It shows that he's developing as a character. He's learning that there are some things that he can't do and shouldn't do. You don't get as much of the parkouring as in the first season, which is a shame, because I thought the parkouring was one of the better aspects of the show. And they did it a lot during the pilot, but they stopped doing it, I think, just because of the expense for insurance purposes, and the fact that parkouring can kind of take its toll on the actors, and sometimes on the stuntmen. So, kind of better to go with stunt doubles and not necessarily do a lot of parkouring. But here I have been saying, like, what are some characters to watch? Well, I'd mentioned Felicity, but why? Why do you want to watch her? Because she has the best dialogue. And I'm not even talking about, like, stupid, nerdy science dialogue. I mean, she manages to get to the heart of a lot of things very quickly. She manages, even though she's outside of everything, to be very much at the center of stuff in just cognitively. And at the same time, she tends to be one of the most charming characters. She's expertly played by Emily Bett Rickards. And I can honestly say, I haven't watched season 3 or 4 yet, or any of the coming seasons, but I can honestly say that she's one of the best parts of the show. There is another character, though, that I think you need to watch out for. And you're going to be like, what? Why? When I tell you. But Black Canary has a little buddy. The little buddy's name is Sin, short for Cindy. She goes by the nickname Sin with an S. She's played by Bex Taylor Klaus. You don't get very much of Sin in the second season, but when she is there, good God, like, her character reacts. Like, I think Bex Taylor Klaus and Emily Bett Rickards actually may be the best actors on the cast. And that's including some really good actors. But in terms of, like, what they're doing with their work, they actually tend to act. And a lot of acting is reacting, and there's that little subtle stuff in their line delivery. They actually have a certain presence of mind as if they're people who are actually in the moment there. They do and say things that are believable. Even if what they're doing is unbelievable, their reactions are believable, is my point. So Sin is basically kind of a bridge character between Black Canary and Roy Harper, who, For those who don't know, Roy Harper is Speedy, Green Arrow's sidekick, who later goes by the name Red Arrow in the comics. I don't know who exactly Sin is. I think that Sin was created for this show. But there is some element that in the comics, apparently Cindy was a sort of ward, someone that Black Canary was supposed to protect. But originally Black Canary didn't have her origins and tied in with Green Arrow, so this is another one where they've kind of contrived how the storylines coincide. But all of that aside, when Sin is on screen, she actually does tend to be there. She's a presence in the storyline. When stuff happens to her, you feel it. And it's like, it's not even about whether or not they're particularly attractive or charismatic. You know, I happen to find the actress charismatic, but I find the actors appealing in that way because when they're on screen, they're actually acting. I mean, I hate to say that. I hate to, sort of knock the other members of the cast, but when these ones are on screen, I'm not getting the sense of soap opera acting where they're chewing that scenery for all it's worth and, just spewing out the dialogue over and over again for the 97th time. I get the sense that they're actually practicing their delivery a little bit, saying it in a certain way. A good example from the second season that I really found was notable. It was a brief little thing. Roy Harper walks up to Sin and is like, come with me, I have to show you something. And she's like, slow it down there, Tiger. And I love that because she actually doesn't know what the heck is going on. She doesn't know this guy that well. And she is clearly used to getting to know a guy a little while, and then eventually he makes a pass at her. In later scenes where she's kind of on her own and not involved with the Canary or with anyone else, just kind of doing her thing, she has scenes involving other men where clearly they like to hit on her. They have a thing for her. And it's understandable. Sin is a very attractive young woman, and she's very confident. She's very sure of herself. She's had to sort of live on her own for quite a while. I don't know how exactly she makes her living, but all of that aside, she's a very compelling character, and you actually get interested in stories when they involve her. I think it's because she's not invested. She has no horse in this race, as it were, except as an individual, just as a person and a friend. So you get this feeling that she's actually there for her own reasons. She doesn't have some ulterior motive. She doesn't care about falling in love with anyone or developing some relationship or finding out the truth or anything like that. She has an interest in just kind of doing the right thing. Even if she doesn't necessarily know what that does, you can feel that there are thought processes going on inside her head. All of the other characters, I get the sense, are just reacting. I don't get the sense that Oliver Queen is really thinking through things, or John Diggle, or Thea, or anyone else aside from Felicity and Sin. They're the only ones that I get a sense of thinking from. Everything else is feeling. Oh, feeling. I must run and do this thing because, there's this thing that I must react to, and I must find out the truth so that I can react to it emotionally. It's all very pathos. Not a lot of logos, not a lot of ethos. Everything is all very black and white with the other characters of it's either good or it's bad, it's either right or it's wrong. And the irony is that for Oliver, when he's doing his thing with Sarah Lance, the canary, she, is like, oh well, it's either kill or be killed, and Arrow's like, well, there's more than two options there. It's more than just those two. It's like, wait a minute, you're constantly seeing things in binaries. You're constantly emotionally reacting to everything. It's one of the reasons why you're not a very good CEO for Queen Enterprises or whatever it's called. Anyway, so I have a huge problem with a lot of that. It's one of the reasons why I've gotten way more into The Flash. I was able to get through 2 seasons of The Flash with way more enjoyment. With Arrow, it took me a lot longer simply because so much of it was previously on this emotional reaction. And there weren't too many characters that I could actually latch onto. With Flash, it was a little bit more thinking person's show. And yeah, I realize it's a superhero soap opera, but there are fewer characters to keep track of overall. Way fewer ins and outs and ups and downs and twists and turns and all of that. And the episodes are way more episodic. They're way more encapsulated, even when they have holdovers from previous episodes and story arcs that come across from previous episodes. It's like, I don't know, is Starling City located on Total Drama Island? Because that's just how it feels. So, with all that aside, is it worth watching Season 2? Yes. Season 2 is relatively enjoyable. There are a lot of good storylines, and you'll get a lot out of it. It's relatively fun, and as long as you don't get too wrapped up in all of the emotional turmoil, you'll actually have a bit more fun kind of just mulling through all of that just so that you can kind of get to the more important stuff, which is the actual plot developments, not just all of the emotional developments. Because I swear, Laurel has 2 settings, hot and cold, and that's either, it's either, oh, well, I love you, Oliver, or I hate you, Oliver, or something like that. It really doesn't run middle of the ground, and that's one of the reasons why I got away from this show for so long. I'll come back with you for Season 3 in a few days, but for now, if you want to, you can leave a constructive or respectful comment below. Feel free to hit like or subscribe, and thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. If you feel like it, donate to my Patreon campaign. It's no big deal if you don't. The show is done on no budget, but I would appreciate it if I received a little bit of income from it, since I don't get a lot of advertising revenue from YouTube or VidMe. Anyway, so thanks again for watching. I appreciate your taking the time and support. Bye-bye.